So we're reading the Srimad Bhagavatam today, and we're on Canto 2, which is entitled The Cosmic Manifestation. And we're on Chapter 10, which is the Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions, and we're on text number 20. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Thank you.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
So, just be a little higher, I guess, a little bit higher. A little bit more up, yeah. Nashike nirabidyetam.
Nashike nirabidyetam.
Doduyati nibhaspati.
Doduyati nibhaspati.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Doduyati nibhaspati.
Doduyati nibhaspati.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Doduyati nibhaspati.
Doduyati nibhaspati.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Please chant.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Nasike
nirabidyetam. Doduyati nibhaspati. Doduyati nibhaspati. Tatrabayur ganda baho. Tatrabayur ganda baho. Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Doduyati nabhaspati.
Doduyati nibhaspati.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Doduyati nabhaspati.
Doduyati nibhaspati.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Doduyati nabhaspati.
Doduyati nibhaspati.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha. Ladies?
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Doduyati nabhaspati.
Doduyati nibhaspati.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Doduyati nibhaspati.
Doduyati nibhaspati.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Nasike nirabidyetam.
Doduyati nabhaspati.
Doduyati nibhaspati.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Tatrabayur ganda baho.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha.
Grano nasi jigrikshataha. Synonyms: nasike, in the nostrils, nirabidyetam, being developed, dodhuryati, rapidly blowing, nabhasvati, air respiration, tatra, thereupon, vayu, air, gandhavaha, smelling odor, granaha, sense of smell, nasi, in the nose, jigrikshataha, desiring to smell odors. Translation: thereafter, when the Supreme Purusha desired to smell odors, the nostrils and respiration were generated. The nasal instrument and odors came into existence, and the controlling deity of air, carrying smell, also became manifested. Please repeat. Thereafter, when the Supreme Purusha desired to smell odors, the nostrils and respiration were generated. The nasal instrument and odors came into existence, and the controlling deity of air, carrying smell, also became manifest. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The nasal instrument, odor, and the controlling deity of air, smelling, etc., all became manifested simultaneously when the Lord desired to smell. The Vedic mantras confirm this statement in the Upanishad statement that everything is first desired by the Supreme before the subordinate living entity can act upon it. The living entity can see only when the Lord sees. The living entity can smell when the Lord smells, and so on. The idea is that the living entity cannot do anything independently. He can simply think of doing something independently, but he cannot act independently. This independence in thinking is there by the grace of the Lord, but the thinking can be given shape by the grace of the Lord, and therefore the common saying is that man proposes and God disposes. The whole explanation is on the subject of the absolute dependence of the living entities and the absolute independence of the Supreme Lord. Less intelligent persons claiming to be on an equal level with God must first prove themselves to be absolute and independent, and then they must substantiate their claim to being one with God. Jnanatamrandasya gyananjana shlakaya chakshurunam tamhena tasmai srivarvena namo vishnupadaya krishna prasthaya bhuleshniti bhaktivedanta swaminiti namaste saraswati devi gauravani pracharine nirvasesh srinivakapastati veshta Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So I'm happy to be back in Croatia. Thank you for your hospitality. I came here in 2009, 10, and 11. There was a party called Mediterranean Meets India, and they would do Harinama in the coastal towns of not only Croatia, but the other countries. Somebody named Mohan, Dasras Sudha, Buddha Datri, and Shamras. And it was wonderful doing Harinam in all the beach towns. Sometimes we had 100 people watching the Harinam party, which doesn't happen in America. So it was very inspiring. So we're on a particular section of the Bhagavatam here, which is dealing with the creation. The second canto and the third canto, in particular, they deal a lot with creation. And as we learned in the beginning of this chapter, the creation is one of the important topics. There's 10 topics in the Bhagavatam. And there's Sarga and Visarga, the first one. Sarga is the creation by Vishnu, and Visarga is the subsequent creation by Brahma. basically Vishnu has to create all the ingredients, and then Brahma can work with them and produce other things. So here we're talking about the universal form of the Lord, which is where different parts of the universe correspond to different features of the Supreme Lord. And it's a way for neophytes who are just trying to understand God as a person can meditate on the Lord. Because actually the whole idea is we have to purify our consciousness from our material absorption to come up to the spiritual plane, and that can be done by meditation on the Lord. So people who are unaware of the transcendental form of the Lord, they can meditate on different parts of the universe as being different parts of the body of the Lord. In this way, meditate on the Lord and purify their consciousness. Because by fixing the mind on the Lord, our consciousness becomes purified of our material absorption. Of course, we do that in this age, as Lord Chaitanya recommended, by the process of the chanting of the holy name. Because there's no difference between the name of the Lord and the Lord himself. Just when we hear the name, or we vibrate the name, our mind is fixed on the Lord, knowingly or unknowingly, and our consciousness becomes purified. And when our consciousness is completely purified, we just want to serve the Lord. We're completely happy serving the Lord. And we have the same consciousness as the people of the spiritual world, and then we can attain the spiritual world. Because the spiritual world, everyone is just happy serving Krishna. They each have their particular service they do, and they're happy serving with the other devotees, feeling transcendental bliss in the Lord's association. So we're hearing how the sequence in which different aspects of the creation become manifest. This is described even in more detail later on in the third canto, chapter 26, where it's Lord Kapila Dev describes in detail the whole process. Basically, you start out with the unmanifest material energy, which is called pradhan. So the pradhan is just in a neutral state, nothing's going on, it's not doing anything. And then the Lord glances over this material, this unmanifest material energy, and then things start to happen. So the proof that the Lord's seeing is not like our seeing, and the Lord's thinking is not like our thinking, is that in the beginning there was no material mind and there was no material sense of sight. So the Lord decided to create with his transcendental mind, and he looked with his transcendental eyes over the material creation, which existed before the material mind, which is a product of the mode of goodness, and the material sense of sight, which is a product of the mode of passion. So in this sort of unmanifested material nature, this pradhan, the Lord glances and everything becomes agitated, and the three modes of material nature are produced. And then from the three modes of material nature, different things are produced. The gross elements are produced from ignorance, the false ego is produced from ignorance, the intelligence is produced from passion, the senses are produced from passion, and the mind is produced from goodness, and the demigods are produced from goodness. And then it's described how the different material elements begin, starting with ether, the most fine element comes first. And along with ether comes the sense of hearing. And then from ether and hearing, by the potency of the Lord, its transformation is made into air. And then the sense of touch, which corresponds to air, becomes manifest. And then after that, after air is transformed by the potency of the Lord into fire. And then the sense of sight, which corresponds to form, becomes manifest. And then then fire is transformed by the touch of the Lord into to water and the sense of taste which is associated with water becomes manifest. And finally, the water is transformed by the potency of the Lord into earth. And then the final sense, the sense of smell, becomes manifest. So there's many different religions out there, and they have an idea that God created, but you won't find anyone who has such a detailed description of how God created as you encounter in this this Vedic philosophy. So the main point that Prabhupada makes in the purport is that that this section of the Bhagavatam is to show how we're actually completely dependent on the mercy of the Lord, because we can't see unless the Lord sees, we can't smell unless the Lord smells. In fact, we're dependent at every step by the mercy of the Lord. And because we're dependent on the mercy of the Lord, it makes sense to take shelter of the Lord. And that's basically this understanding is meant to bring us to the point of completely surrendering to Krishna, because by surrendering to Krishna, we can attain a full enlightenment and we can actually attain the abode of Krishna. But if we're not convinced of the necessity of surrendering to Krishna, we won't surrender to Krishna. So there's different ways we can explain how we're dependent on the Lord. The way I usually like to do it is, Krishna describes in Bhagavad Gita, Sarvasya chaham vridhisani vistoma tasmritim ganam aponam cha. I'm seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. So we could very easily see how we're controlled by this remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness, because we're completely dependent on the Lord reminding us of things. And if we don't remember things, then we can't actually accomplish anything. We can only function because the Lord is giving us intelligence within the heart. And if we're not given that intelligence, we may want to quote a certain verse during Bhagavatam class. We may have studied it for years, but at the crucial time, we may or may not be able to quote it. And that's by the grace of the Lord, who's supplying the remembrance, who's supplying the forgetfulness. Basically, Prabhupada explains that he causes the devotees to forget the pursuit of material enjoyment, and he causes the non-devotees to forget the value of pursuing spiritual life. But in both cases, our forgetfulness is directed by the Lord. So we can very easily see that we're controlled in this way by the Lord. There's related points. One is that the material energy is also not independent, that it's working by the direction of the Lord. There's a very famous verse, Mayadakshena prakrite suite sacharacha hiranana konteya jagat viparivartate, which I'll just read the translation exactly rather than paraphrase it. But the word in there, there's a word in there that means under the superintendence of the Lord, the material nature is doing everything. Basically, the material nature working under Krishna's direction is producing the different living entities. Because the atheists and the materialists, they think that nature is working of its own accord. But nature is inert, just like a car. A car just sits in one place until a driver gets in and then starts up the engine and drives it around. So the material nature is like that. There's, unless it's directed by a higher principle, nothing really happens. the materialistic scientists, they try to explain everything without reference to the Lord, but there are very important things they can't explain. Like they say in the beginning there was some explosion, some big bang, but where the ingredients that were exploded, where they came from, they can't explain. And they also can't explain the laws of physics. Where did the laws of physics come from? That can't be explained. So, but we understand that the Supreme Lord is behind everything. He is the source of all the ingredients. And He's the source of the laws by which they're transformed. And He's the source of the laws of material nature. And this material nature, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings. Under its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So Krishna's directing the material energy to produce so many things, but without Krishna's direction, nothing really happens. So I'll go back to the purport again and see if there's any particular points I wanted to mention. Prabhupada makes a point that we can think of doing something independently, but we actually can't act independently. And it's described basically because we're part and parcel of Krishna, we have the same tendencies as Krishna does. So we have a tendency toward independence. We can desire independently. But our situation is we're a very tiny soul, we're 1/10,000th the tip of a hair in size, and we're seated inside a material body. And that this material body is produced of the material nature and it's working under material laws. The scientists have this idea of controlling nature, right? But actually their bodies are a product of nature. So how can they actually control nature? And so, but we have independence and we can desire independently, but it's up to Krishna whether our desire is actually fulfilled. And therefore the devotees, they always give thanks to Krishna for whatever they're able to accomplish, because they know it's actually only by the mercy of Krishna that they're able to do anything, because He's actually the person who moves the material energy. And then he talks about that there's a class of people who claim to be one with God. There's one devotee in America, and she was telling her how I came to Krishna consciousness story, and she would go up in the mountains and she would meditate on how she was controlling the sun rising and as being one with God. So there are people out there like that, but there's a lot of difference. We talk about in this tradition that we're simultaneously one with and different from God, inconceivably simultaneously one with and different from God. It's called Achintya Beta Beta Tattva. Achintya means inconceivable, Beta means different, and Abeta means one. So how are we one with God? We're one with God in that we're conscious. We're one with God in that we're eternal. There's a nice verse from the Upanishads that Prabhupada would like to quote from time to time. Let's see. Nityanam, Nityanam Chetananam Eko Bahudam Vividadi Kama. That basically, of all the eternals, there's one eternal, and of all the conscious beings, there's one conscious being who's maintaining all the others. So although we're conscious and we're eternal like God, we're not fulfilling the desires of everyone in the universe. In the Isha Upanishad, the Lord has described that that self-sufficient philosopher who's been fulfilling everyone's desires since time immemorial. So there's innumerable eternal beings, there's innumerable conscious beings, but there's one conscious eternal being who's fulfilling the desires of all others. And that is the Supreme Lord. And that is the person who's worthy of our worship. And so we can say we're one with God in the sense that we're conscious, we're one with God in the sense that we're eternal, and we're one with God in the sense that we can desire independently, but we can't actually move the material nature. The moving of the material nature is done by the Supreme Lord, and He does it in accordance with our desires, but also what we deserve. Therefore, we desire many things in the course of our life, but we're not able to attain them all because we didn't deserve them. Krishna decides whether we're worthy to have the objects of our desire become manifest. So we're always dependent on Krishna for the results of our activities. There's a verse that says, we have the right to perform our prescribed duty, but we're not entitled to the fruits of action. And never consider yourself the results of the cause of the results of your activities. Never be attached to not doing your duty. So these are different illusions people have that they're the cause of the results of their activities. They can choose whether they endeavor or not, but whether they're successful in their endeavor, that's up to the Supreme Lord. And therefore, because we're dependent, we're subordinate to God. And because God is independent, actually, He can give us protection. We tend to take shelter of things that can give us protection. But only Krishna, because He's supremely independent, can actually give us complete protection. And this comes up in the Krishna book in many different places. Different demons, they take shelter of Lord Shiva. But in the ultimate issue, when they offend Lord Krishna and they get into a fight with him, even though Lord Shiva enters in on their side, they're still miserably defeated by Krishna very easily. Because Krishna is the supreme controller. And not even the great demigods like Brahma and Shiva are independent of Krishna. So Krishna is our infallible shelter, and we're very fortunate that He has come in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and taught a very simple process by which we can awaken our dormant love for Him. There's a nice verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhikabunai Shavanadi Shuddhachite Karya Udai. Love of Godhead is eternally established in the heart of the living being. It's not something to be gained from another source. When one engages in the devotional service, beginning with hearing, one's consciousness is purified, and that love becomes manifest. So because we're part of Krishna, we already have love for Krishna within us. And it becomes manifest the more our consciousness becomes purified by being engaged in devotional service. There's another nice verse in this connection that goes that talks about how our material senses, they can't grasp Krishna because Krishna is transcendental. Atasri Krishna namadi nabhavad graham indriyai sevan mukhi jivado spayam eva sparatida. The material senses of the living entity, they can't grasp the name, form, qualities, and pastimes of the Supreme Lord because they're transcendental. But when one's senses become purified by being engaged in devotional service, beginning with the tongue, then these qualities and manifestations of Krishna become perceivable. We can perceive the transcendental form and name and qualities and pastimes of the Lord with our purified senses. And how do we engage in devotional service? Beginning with the tongue, by chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, and by taking prasadam. And if people just did those two things, chant Hare Krishna and take prasadam, they could very easily become very, very purified. So we try to engage people in this devotional service so they become purified and become eligible to advance spiritual life. So those are a little few words about the independence of the Lord and the dependence of the living entity and the creation. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or realizations related to these things? Yes, sir.
In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the 7th chapter of Adilila, there's that verse where it is described that the Lord is like the blazing fire and we are like the sparks.
Right.
And in the purport, Prabhupada, in describing the Lord, gives an analogy that a king needs his subordinates to be the king.
Right.
We call Krishna the supreme independent, but is the Purusha dependent on the Prakriti to be the Purusha?
Well, of course, if you Krishna is the supreme controller, which implies he has something to control. And he is controlling, he's controlling his different energies. He's controlling his material energy, and he's controlling his spiritual energy, and he's controlling his marginal energy. So that's the reality of the situation, that there is the controller and his energies. And so there's a relationship between them. And the energies of the Lord, I enjoy being controlled by the Lord, actually. In a purified spiritual state, we enjoy being controlled by the Lord because that's our constitutional position. So it's like you can ask, does he need to have things to control to be the Lord? But the reality is that he does have things to control, and he is the Lord, you know? So, yeah.
When we say that he is the supreme independent, it implies that there is something that he is independent of. Like his independence depends on that.
I see, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, he's called Svarat in the very first verse of the Bhagavatam. He's called Svarat, which means independent. And it's described among there's those 10 categories of that are described in the Puranas, including the Bhagavatam. And one is the Ashraya. He's the shelter of everything. Because he's independent, so many dependent things are taking shelter of him. So that's the situation. He's the independent support of everything else in existence. And everything is non-different from him because it's an emanation from him. But the problem is that under illusion, we don't see the connection of things with Krishna. That's described in the Chatur Shloki of the Bhagavatam. There's those 4 verses which are in the previous chapter of the Bhagavatam, actually. And one of those verses is 34, which is Vitetam ya pratiyeta na pratiyeta chatmani tad vidyat atmano mayam yatabasa yatatama. O Brahma, whatever appears to be of any value, if it is without relation to me, has no reality. know it as my illusory energy, that reflection which appears to be in darkness. So if we see something that has no connection to Krishna, it really does have a connection to Krishna, and it's a manifestation of Krishna's illusory energy. That's how all-encompassing Krishna is. There actually is nothing that has no connection with Krishna. If something seems to have no connection with Krishna, that's a manifestation of Krishna's illusory energy. So the devotee is always remembering, is always seeing everything in its connection with Krishna. And because he's seeing everything as Krishna's property, he's engaged in Krishna's property and Krishna's service. And therefore he's not entangled. Everyone else is seeing the property as their own. Or people think that the earth belongs to human society, but the earth belongs to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And you have to use the earth according to his direction, otherwise you get entangled. So it's like you may live in an apartment, but it's not like you can do whatever you want with the apartment because you have a landlord, and you could decide that you want to put another wall in the apartment because you want an extra room or something, but you can't do that without the permission of the landlord, otherwise you get in trouble. So Krishna's that we're never the supreme proprietor, not even our own body. We haven't created this body. This body was created for us by the material nature under the direction of Krishna. So this is actually Krishna's body, and Krishna's body should be used for Krishna's purpose. So the enlightened devotee knows all this, and therefore he engages Krishna's property and Krishna's service, and he becomes more and more Krishna conscious. And whereas the people who are in ignorance, they consider the property their own and use it according to their own imagination and remain entangled with the three modes of material nature and get a body either higher or lower or in the middle, depending on what mode of nature they're enchanted by. But the devotees, because they're seeing everything in relationship with the Supreme Lord, their mind is fixed on the Lord and they attain the abode of the Lord when they leave this world. Any other questions and comments? Yes, sir.
I want to ask a preliminary question, like a basic question. Even though I so-called can say I'm in the movement, it's not true. Two persons exist, the Jiva and Krishna.
Right.
One is controller, one is controlled.
Right.
What's the odds that the controller will not be jealous of the controlled? The controlled will not be jealous of the controlled?
Well, basically, in our pure state, we're not jealous of the controller because we love the controller. Like somebody may be superior to you in different ways, but if you love them, then you're not jealous of them. You're happy to serve them. You know? So in our materially conditioned state, like we're born into the material nature, so we're born in a material contamination. So things like jealousy, envy is one of the 6 material whips, right? So it's natural in material life that we're envious of things, but when we're purified, we're very happy to be controlled by Krishna because we see how Krishna's control is beneficial for us. And like, for example, like Krishna is famous for being omniscient. So if there's somebody who exists who's omniscient, and we experience every day we make stupid mistakes, right? Then it makes sense that we follow this person who's omniscient rather than following our own imagination. So we could envy Krishna for his omniscience, or we can take advantage of his wisdom by acting according to it and attain appreciation for him rather than envy of him, and advance spiritually. So it's makes sense in our conditioned state that for envy to arise, but if we actually understand the true glories of the Lord, then that understanding defeats the envy. Because we see how the Lord is benefiting us. In so many ways, we feel gratitude toward the Lord rather than envy of the Lord. That's the best I can do with that one, especially in the brief amount of time I had. So we have to end here out of fear of the temple president, because we're not independent. So we thank you for your kind attention. You've stayed very alert during Bhagavatam class. I award you for that. As a reward, I brought some Maha Prasadam from Radha Govinda, who were donated by the Queen of Jaipur to the Hare Krishna movement and installed by Srila Prabhupada in New York. So there's probably at least enough for you all to have half a piece, so it's in the refrigerator. So make sure you get some. Thank you for your time. It's Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki.